What happens when one of radio's most ruthless interviewers comes face to face with a prince who believes he still controls the narrative? Nobody in that studio knew the answer yet. But everyone could feel that something was about to go very, very wrong. The red on-air sign glowed above the glass like a warning light, casting a faint crimson reflection across the polished desk, the microphones, the soundboard littered with blinking LEDs. The air inside Howard Stern's studio felt unusually tight, heavier than normal, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Even the hum of equipment seemed louder, sharper, more alert. Then the door opened. Prince Harry stepped inside. There was a brief ripple through the studio audience, soft murmurs. Shifting bodies, phones instinctively lifting before being waved down by producers. Harry wore a carefully chosen expression, calm, open, rehearsed. The kind of face built in media training rooms, practiced in mirrors, refined across countless interviews. But beneath it, something flickered. A tension in the jaw. A stiffness in the shoulders. The faintest hesitation before the door closed behind him with a dull, final thud. That sound landed harder than it should have. Howard Stern watched him enter without standing. No extended welcome. No royal acknowledgement. Just a slow lean back in his chair, fingers steepled, eyes already measuring, already dissecting. Harry crossed the room. Shaking hands, smiling for the cameras, nodding toward the audience like a man stepping onto a familiar stage. He'd done this dance before, late-night shows, serious sit-downs, sympathetic hosts who leaned in and nodded at the right moments. This was just another interview. Or so he thought. The chair scraped softly as Harry sat down. He adjusted his jacket, straightened his posture. Leaned slightly toward the microphone. Somewhere deep in the control room, a producer counted down silently with raised fingers. 3, 2, 1. Howard didn't waste a second. "So, Harry," he said casually, voice smooth, almost friendly. "You've been making a lot of noise lately about privacy." Harry blinked once. Just once. "And yet," Howard continued, leaning back, that familiar half-smile forming, "here you are. On my show. Talking to millions of people. Help me understand the logic." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Harry shifted in his seat, barely perceptible but unmistakable. This wasn't the opening he'd expected. Not the gentle runway. Not the respectful framing. He forced a small chuckle, the kind meant to disarm. "Well, Howard," he said, carefully, "there's a difference between choosing to share your story and having it stolen from you by tabloids who twist it for profit." Howard nodded slowly. Too slowly. "Right," he said. "A beat. Right." The pause stretched just long enough to make people uncomfortable. "So when you do a Netflix documentary," Howard continued, voice sharpening just slightly, "write a book, give multiple interviews, that's you controlling your narrative. But when a photographer takes a picture of you grabbing coffee, that's an invasion of privacy. Do I have that right?" Harry's jaw tightened. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. But it was visible. Cameras caught it instantly. "It's not that simple," Harry replied, a trace of irritation creeping in despite his restraint. "You're oversimplifying a very complex situation." Howard leaned forward now, elbows resting on the desk, eyes locked in. "Am I?" he asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you want to have your cake and eat it too." A murmur rolled through the audience. "You want the benefits of being royal when it suits you," Howard continued, voice calm but cutting, "and you want to play the victim when it doesn't." Harry's face flushed. "That's completely unfair," he shot back. "And you know it. I've sacrificed everything to protect my family from the same machine that killed my mother." The room froze. Howard raised both hands slowly. "Whoa, whoa, whoa," he said. "Let's pump the brakes there, Your Highness." A nervous laugh rippled through the audience, quickly dying out. You've sacrificed everything. Howard continued. You live in a $16 million mansion in Montecito. Your wife has her own production deals. You're promoting multiple projects. What exactly have you sacrificed? Harry leaned forward now, voice rising. My relationship with my family. My homeland. My sense of security, he said sharply. Things you couldn't possibly understand. Howard laughed. Not kindly. Your sense of security? He repeated. Buddy, you've got more security than the president. And as for your family, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't you write an entire book trashing them? Didn't you go on television and basically call them racists? I never called them racists, Harry protested, hands tightening around the armrests. No, Howard said smoothly. You just heavily implied it and let everyone else draw the conclusion. Very brave. The sarcasm cut deep. When you were writing that book, Howard continued, did you ever stop to think how your father would feel reading it? Or how your brother would react to you sharing private conversations? Harry fidgeted now. His foot tapped lightly against the floor. His eyes darted, just briefly, toward the producer's booth. Those stories needed to be told, he said. The truth needed to come out. Howard didn't blink. The truth, he repeated. According to who? You. A beat. See, here's what I don't get, Howard went on. You say you want privacy, but you keep talking. You say you want peace, but you keep stirring the pot. You say you want to protect your family, but you keep exposing them. Which one am I supposed to believe? Harry inhaled sharply. This interview is supposed to be about my charity work, he said, attempting to regain control. Oh, is it now? Howard grinned. Because your people pitched this as an opportunity to set the record straight about recent controversies. Harry froze. So which is it? Howard pressed. Charity. Or more scores to settle? I thought this would be a more respectful conversation, Harry said tightly. Howard's eyebrows shot up. Respectful? He leaned in. You want respect? Earn it. You don't get to spend years attacking your family in public and then walk in here expecting kid gloves. This isn't the BBC, sweetheart. This is reality. Harry's fists clenched. You don't know what you're talking about, he snapped. Howard didn't hesitate. You're right, he said. I don't know what it's like to grow up royal. But I do know what it's like to take responsibility for your choices. To build something instead of being handed everything and then complaining about it. The words landed like blows. Do you think any of this has been easy? Harry shot back, voice cracking just slightly. No. Howard replied. But you sure monetized it well. The studio fell silent. Harry swallowed, eyes burning. You know what your problem is? Howard continued. You want to be seen as both a victim and a hero. Sympathy and praise. But you can't have both forever. Harry stared at him, stunned. You're trying to humiliate me, he said. Howard laughed instantly. No, he replied. I'm asking questions no one else has the guts to ask. Harry pushed his chair back and stood up. I don't have to sit here and listen to this character assassination. Sit down, Howard said sharply. The command cut through the room like a whip. You booked this interview, Howard continued. You promoted it. You agreed to it. You don't get to storm out because you don't like the questions. Harry remained standing, chest rising and falling, torn between fury and disbelief. This isn't an interview, he said. It's an ambush. No, Howard fired back. This is accountability. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Harry looked like a man standing at the edge of something, unsure whether to leap, or be pushed. And as the silence stretched, as the camera zoomed in on his clenched jaw and shaking hands, one thing became painfully clear: this was no longer about privacy. This was about to become something far more personal. And far more explosive. Harry remained standing for a moment longer, his body rigid, like a wire pulled too tight. The studio lights reflected off the faint sheen of sweat on his forehead, catching details no palace photographer ever would. This wasn't a balcony wave or a scripted charity appearance. This was raw, unfiltered, and spiraling fast. Slowly, almost reluctantly. He sat back down. But something had changed. The easy posture was gone. The practiced calm had evaporated. What remained was a man bracing himself, shoulders squared, jaw locked, eyes sharp with wounded defiance. The audience sensed it too, the subtle shift from curiosity to discomfort, from entertainment to something that felt almost intrusive. Howard noticed immediately. He leaned back, satisfied, like a chess player watching an opponent make a forced move. "There we go," Howard said lightly. "Now we're being honest." Harry didn't respond. His fingers drummed once against the table before stopping, as if he'd caught himself. "You know," Howard continued, voice deceptively calm, "what's fascinating about all of this is that every time you're challenged, you reach for the same shield." Harry's eyes narrowed. "And what shield is that?" "My mother," Howard replied instantly. The word landed hard. "You invoke her death like a credential," Howard went on. "Like it exempts you from criticism. Like no one's allowed to question your choices because something tragic happened to you when you were 12. Harry's breath hitched. "That's disgusting," he said quietly. "You have no right, no right." Howard interrupted. "You've built an entire public identity around it. Every speech. Every interview. Every documentary. It always circles back to Diana. What she'd want. What she'd think. What she'd feel." Harry leaned forward, eyes blazing. "My mother was hunted," he snapped. "Destroyed by the same media machine you're part of." Howard didn't flinch. "And yet," he said, "here you are. Feeding that machine. Constantly." A low murmur rippled through the audience. "You say you're breaking cycles," Howard continued. "But all I see is repetition. Public fights. Public blame. Public victimhood. The only thing that's changed is now you're getting paid for it." Harry shook his head, laughing bitterly. "You think this is easy?" he demanded. "You think waking up every day knowing the world is waiting to tear you apart is easy?" Howard leaned forward again, voice sharpening. "No," he said. "What I think is that millions of people wake up every day with real problems, and they don't get Netflix deals to talk about them. That did it." Harry's face flushed deep red, the anger no longer contained. His voice cracked, rising in pitch. "You have no idea what pressure feels like," he shouted. "No idea what it's like to be born into that family." Howard's eyes hardened. "You're right," he said. "I don't know what it's like to be born into privilege. But I do know what it's like to be accountable." The word echoed. "Accountability," Howard repeated. "That's what you've been running from." Harry laughed sharply, shaking his head. "I left to protect my family. And then wrote a book about them," Howard shot back. "I spoke my truth." "Your truth," Howard corrected. "Not the truth." Harry stood up again, more abruptly this time. "This ends now." Howard's voice cut through him like a blade. "No," he said. "Now it gets interesting." The audience gasped audibly. "You want to talk about protection?" Howard continued. "Let's talk about the people you left behind. Your father. Your brother. Did you ever consider that maybe, just maybe, they didn't deserve to be dragged through the mud so you could rebrand yourself?" Harry's hands were shaking now. "They failed me," he said through clenched teeth. Or you failed them, Howard countered. Silence. The kind that presses against your ears. Harry stared at Howard as if seeing him for the first time, not as a host, not as a provocateur, but as a threat. Someone who wasn't impressed. Someone who wasn't afraid. You know what I see? Howard continued. I see a man who confuses attention with purpose. Who mistakes exposure for healing. That book was about healing, Harry snapped. Oh, please, Howard scoffed. Healing doesn't come with a press tour. Harry slammed his hand against the table. The sound echoed through the studio, sharp and sudden, like a gunshot. The audience recoiled. There it is, Howard said softly, almost pleased. That's the real you. Harry was breathing hard now, chest heaving. You pushed me to this, he said. No, Howard replied. I revealed you. The words hung heavy. This anger, Howard went on, this entitlement, this is who you are when the script falls apart. Harry looked away, jaw trembling. You know what's tragic? Howard continued. You could have been extraordinary. You had everything, platform, influence, goodwill. And instead of using it quietly, powerfully, you chose spectacle. Harry turned back sharply. You think you're better than me? He demanded. Howard didn't hesitate. I think I'm honest, he said. And I think you're addicted to being wronged. The audience shifted uncomfortably. This no longer felt like entertainment. It felt like watching something crack. Harry's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Leave my wife out of this. Howard raised an eyebrow. Why? He asked. She hasn't stayed out of it. Harry froze. You don't get to talk about her, he said. Howard leaned back, hands open. She's done interviews. She's signed deals. She's made herself part of the narrative. That makes her relevant. Harry's fists clenched. She's the reason you're here, Howard continued calmly. Whether you like it or not. Harry's eyes flashed. You're crossing a line. Howard smiled thinly. No, he said. I'm walking straight through one you pretended wasn't there. Harry stood up again, this time pacing behind his chair, unable to sit still. You don't know anything about my marriage, he said. I know what I see, Howard replied. Separate appearances. Separate agendas. And a man desperately trying to convince himself he didn't make a catastrophic mistake. Harry stopped pacing. Stop, he said quietly. Howard didn't. She's more famous than you now, Howard continued. Does that bother you? Harry's hands trembled violently. You're disgusting, he spat. Howard shrugged. I'm observant. The audience sat frozen, eyes darting between the two men like spectators at a slow-motion crash. You've burned bridges, Howard went on. Family. Friends. Institutions. All to defend choices you're not even sure about anymore. Harry slammed his palm against the table again. Enough. Howard remained seated, calm as ever. There it is, he said. That's the anger you pretend doesn't exist. Harry looked like he might explode, or collapse. And then Howard said it. The one thing no one expected. At what point, Howard asked quietly, do you stop hiding behind your mother's death and start owning the man you've become? The air left the room. Harry staggered back a step as if struck. The audience gasped. How dare you, Harry whispered, his voice breaking. Howard didn't blink. Because someone needs to say it, he replied. You're not 12 anymore. Harry stared at him, eyes glossy, jaw trembling. And in that moment, caught between rage, grief, and something dangerously close to collapse, the prince looked less like royalty. And more like a man who had just lost control of the story. And Howard wasn't done. Not even close. The studio didn't breathe. For a long moment, there was nothing but the faint hum of equipment and the software of cameras adjusting their focus, zooming in on a man who looked as if the ground beneath him had quietly disappeared. Prince Harry stood frozen, eyes glossy, lips parted slightly, as though words were trying, and failing, to escape. Howard Stern didn't rush him. He knew better. This was the moment when masks slipped. When performance gave way to truth. Harry swallowed hard. His chest rose and fell in uneven rhythms, the kind that come when anger, grief, and humiliation collide all at once. He looked around the studio, not at Howard, but past him, toward the audience, the cameras, the invisible millions listening beyond the walls. "You don't get to talk about my mother like that," Harry said finally, his voice trembling, low but dangerous. Howard nodded once. Slowly. "You're right," he said. "I don't get to weaponize her memory." A pause. "But neither do you." The words landed heavier than anything that had come before. Harry's hands curled into fists at his sides. His shoulders slumped just a fraction, as if the fight was draining out of him in real time. "You think I enjoy this?" Harry snapped weakly. "You think I enjoy reliving it over and over?" Howard leaned forward, elbows on the desk now, his tone shifting, not softer, but sharper in a different way. "No," he said. "I think you don't know who you are without it." The audience shifted uneasily. "For 20 years, Howard continued, you've been the grieving son. And that mattered. It still does. But somewhere along the way, that became your entire identity. Every criticism becomes an attack on your trauma. Every disagreement becomes persecution." Harry shook his head, rubbing his face with both hands. "You don't understand," he muttered. Howard exhaled slowly. "No," he said. "I understand perfectly. You confuse pain with purpose." Harry looked up sharply. "My purpose is helping people," he insisted. "Mental health. Charity. Awareness," and yet, Howard interrupted, "every road leads back to you." The studio lights felt harsher now, illuminating every crease in Harry's forehead, every twitch of his jaw. "You talk about service," Howard went on. "But real service is quiet. It's thankless. It doesn't come with book tours and camera crews. Your grandmother understood that." Harry flinched. "Don't," he warned. "Don't bring her into this." Howard didn't back off. "Queen Elizabeth lived her entire life under scrutiny," he said. "She endured loss, betrayal, public humiliation, without ever turning it into a product. She believed duty came before self." Harry's voice cracked. "The institution failed me." Howard tilted his head. "Or maybe," he said carefully, "it didn't bend enough to your expectations." Harry laughed bitterly. "So I was supposed to stay? Suffer in silence?" "No." Howard replied. "You were supposed to grow up." The audience gasped. "That's the part no one wants to say out loud," Howard continued. "At some point, adulthood means accepting that life isn't fair, and that privilege doesn't exempt you from responsibility." Harry's shoulders sagged. He looked exhausted now. Not angry. Not defiant. Just tired. "I didn't ask to be born into that family," he said quietly. "No," Howard agreed. "But you chose what to do with it." Silence stretched again, thick and uncomfortable. Harry stared down at the desk, fingers tracing invisible patterns along the edge. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller. "You have no idea how alone I've felt." Howard studied him for a long moment. "Loneliness doesn't make you special," he said. "It makes you human. The difference is, most people don't broadcast it to the world and demand applause for surviving it." Harry closed his eyes. The fight was gone now. "This interview is over," he said faintly. Howard nodded. It can be, he said. But understand this, walking out won't change what just happened. Harry stood slowly, no anger this time. Just defeat. You held up a mirror, Howard continued, his voice steady. And you didn't like what you saw. But that reflection doesn't disappear when you leave the room. Harry hesitated, hand hovering near the edge of the desk. For what it's worth, Howard added, I don't think you're evil. I think you're lost. Harry looked at him then, really looked at him. Lost wasn't an insult. It was worse. He nodded once, sharply, as if accepting a verdict he couldn't appeal. Without another word, Prince Harry turned and walked toward the exit. The sound of his footsteps echoed unnaturally loud in the studio. The door opened. Light spilled in briefly, then vanished as it closed behind him. The silence that followed was absolute. Howard leaned back in his chair, removed his headphones, and exhaled. He turned toward the microphone once more. And that, he said calmly, is what happens when entitlement meets reality. The audience remained still, unsure whether to clap, unsure whether they just witnessed entertainment, or something far more uncomfortable. Howard looked straight into the camera. Sometimes, he said, the truth doesn't sound kind. But it's still the truth. The red on air sign dimmed. The interview was over. But the fallout was only beginning. If you made it this far, you just witnessed one of the most explosive confrontations ever imagined between privilege and accountability. Now I want to hear from you. Did Howard go too far? Or did Prince Harry finally hear something no one else was willing to say? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this debate is far from over. And if you want more cinematic breakdowns, brutal celebrity confrontations, and moments the mainstream won't touch, like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to see it. Because some stories don't just entertain. They expose.